Appears to be recording. I better check. Well, computer's not working too well. Anyway, hopefully. Anyway. So yes, draft physics video presentation. Getting tougher. Yeah, whatever. Comments first, then Van Biezen, I guess. Low enthusiasm. Sorry. They are trying to integrate your ideas without logging in themselves. Whatever that means. Logging. I don't think so. Stealing your ideas. I don't think so. You really can't really steal them. I mean, they're free, so you can't steal the free stuff. If somebody can apply them in some way, good for them. It's clear who thought of it first, so who cares? But without understanding the bigger picture, I say it's a dangerous game. I say I don't know what the hell you're talking about, and such. But all of you people, I don't know what you're talking about most of the time, but whatever. We'll just say we've had enough of that. DraftScience. There was a video a couple of days ago. Yes, I explained that. I understand. Okay, the concept. It's good for people to, if they see something, to point it out. Very good. But it was a fact that the link doesn't work. Okay, so that's just a fact, and it is kind of irritating. And I suppose if you were really thought it was some kind of valuable thing, you might want to check the comments section or something and see if anything was happening, if it was important in some way. But whatever. Yeah, I understand. Okay, no big deal. I'm not in control of them taking down, and I expect it to still be there. Yeah, I said all that. I understand that. Yes, I can understand your model and find your questions of the current model experiments interesting. Well, that's the best you can do. I'm just saying, what value is that to me? How much evidence do I have to actually pile up before you'll say, yeah, you're right. The current physics is full of shit. They're just making up stories on tiny shreds of evidence. They don't even need it to look like very much. And they'll say, yes, it's entangled. Yes, it has a mind of its own. Yes, it's conscious. Yes, it's, they just jump every reasonable bit of caution in allowing their speculations just to be facts. Whatever they can make up, and it seems a little bit like it's not. I'll say it's not even in the realm of reasonable. Bent space isn't a reasonable explanation. I mean, it's a cop out, so obviously a cop out. And this is the best you can do. I find it interesting, so I'm supposed to find you somebody I should give a fuck as a commenter, because again, how much evidence do I have to pile up before I'm like, what? Oh yeah, you'll show up in the end after I'm already sitting here with the prize saying I win, and then you'll say, oh yeah, you did a very good job, and blah 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 blah. But fuck that. Who needs that? I don't need that. I don't need your after the show applause. I need your getting the show produced help. So, what do you want me to say? From my perspective, can I'm supposed to see your point of view, but you don't have to see my point of view? I've been doing this for whatever, 8 years, 9 years, some kind of preposterous number of years. And I got nothing to show for it in terms of anybody who has any notion of reality. And the only thing that is around are dissidents, other loop-de-doos who have some other kooky, nutty, silly, jump the evidence theory of reality. Jeez. Oh, so you've been aggrieved. Sorry. But I'm still relearning standard physics. Fine. I guess I'm still doing it myself in the sense that it's hard to pick out where they actually made a conclusion based on anything called real evidence, right? Because everything you research, like Stern-Gerlach and the slit experiments, they don't bother doing any extensive research, even a minor amount of it. They don't play with these experiments, obviously. Obviously, they haven't figured out the fact that the multi-slit experiment is shooting images to the different locations. And that might be a problem when you're trying to make up some theory of randomness having something to do with something, because images aren't going to be randomly recomposed. Anyway. I only have so many hours in the day with work, etc. Yes, I understand. We all have problems. Life is difficult. You think it's just easy street here, do you? Well, it's not. I posted the previous link as I thought you might want to respond. Well, I probably would have liked to have done that, but clearly the person who posted the video took it down, and so therefore that can't take place because blah, 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 blah. And so whatever. Sorry to have wasted your time. Well, I don't know if it was a waste of time. I didn't exactly say it was a waste of time. I said I sort of understand. That's what I sort of said. Sort of. This will be my last post. Oh, so you're all hurt. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, well, it's a hot kitchen. And if you can't appreciate that all I've gotten for 9 years is 97% grief from morons. If that's what you can't appreciate, well, then you can't appreciate it. So, yeah, we really don't. There's no point in us communicating because you can't understand, that you shouldn't have some expectation that I find this all charming, because I don't. Fuck. So you get 4 little thumbs up for your little butthurt complaint. Really. And so I'm supposed to say, what am I supposed to say to even that? I'm supposed to say, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. 4 people agree with you that, oh, it's just too rough here. And what did I do? I didn't do much. I mean, I just pointed out how, yeah, this sucks. There's no link. It doesn't work. And yeah, it's just more crap where, oh, I'm supposed to explain away somebody else's nonsense. When I've already done the explaining. I sat there and give you a rational theory of light polarization. I mean, it's a rational diagram of how it works. Why there's a pattern, all of that crap. I've given you that. I've given you a rational description of how a magnet works. I mean, a completely rational explanation. No hyperboloids, no swirly crap, no energy from nowhere. Just kind of explaining how a magnet is just a filter. And it's filtering the very energy that you don't have for gravity, because you sit there and bought into some bullshit notion that gravity has something to do with some bent mathematics somewhere. Instead of realizing, no, there has to be an actual force, the one Newton was looking for. Newton was saying, basically, well, it's kind of ludicrous to think things move for no good fucking reason. So there must be something going on. Yeah, I don't know what the fuck it is. It's invisible. But yeah, there's got to be something out there doing something. What, that's crazy talk? Fucking people. So then some other asshole says, good way to go. Yeah, you're just cowards and pussies then, in my opinion. Weak ass shit. You talk shit, big, you post your links, you do your shit, take no account for anything, and then complain. Phew, like you got it tough. I mean, it's almost so hilarious. I've answered questions haven't been answered for hundreds of years rationally. Put it right there on the table for you, and this is what I get: is your fucking whiny grief. Shit. Yeah, that's all I got to say. Shit. Fucking idiocracy. Sorry, but that's what I'm seeing. Like I said, you all show up when all the other, pencil geek nerdy, whatever the hell they are, when all of them are forced to comply, and say, oh, I guess it's true, there's no unicorns. Then you'll sit there and say something gratuitously weak, also. Anyway, annoying people. Alright, so on to cosmic background radiation. So another subject for which they have irrational description, in my opinion. So as soon as they started talking about this stuff, I was like, how do I tie this to a Big Bang, right? I mean, you're sitting there trying to say, okay, let's try to make sense out of this crap they say. Stupid glitches. Who knows if this video will be a video? And I've already deleted the comments. Cool. That's good enough. All right. So the idea is you have this Big Bangy thing, right? So there's a whole bunch of consolidated matter in one little tiny place. and somehow the matter separates. Okay, there's something called the Big Bang, and so you can understand some clumps might go out. So I don't know what their argument is, but if you've known explosions as I know explosions, the stuff that comes out is the little shit first, right? Little tiny little bits of stuff, the energy, the light, the photon-y kind of stuff flies out. And it's moving the speed of light, right? And you're saying, well, the stuff that was in the speed of the bang, the light wave of the explosion, is going to be the stuff moving the fastest. You're going to see it first. You're going to hear it later, and then pieces of it are going to hit you even later, because all the big stuff's going to be moving much slower. Okay, S-L-O-W, slowly. That stuff's going to be moving slow, and the little stuff's going to be moving really fast. So the little stuff's going to be way out here while this stuff is still barely moving. And so I'm saying cosmic background radiation, how the fuck can it hit us when we're on one of the slow bits? We're the slow matter, okay? We're the stuff that didn't get too far from the old bang-a-rainy, right? And so how can this cosmic background radiation, you turn and I'm going to hit you over here? That doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, the whole story didn't make any sense. So now what they're playing some heat game now. So now it's like, okay, it exploded, but it's not hot. So at least it's not the cosmic background radiation. So it might have been hot, and there might be radiation all out here that is gone. Okay, so the radiation from the bang is gone. But somehow as this stuff, flew out, it somehow decided, I'm going to get hot again. Okay, I got cold, but now I'm going to start getting hot again for some dopey reason. And it created a bunch of radiation when it was in this stage somewhere. So it started getting hot. And then the stuff slowly is moving away, still moving away. It still doesn't make any sense, because there should be a big empty spot where the bang started, right? The bang should have made like a void. And where's the void? Well, there's no void. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And yeah, their description, they draw the universe like some kind of cone or something, and this is its evolution. This is like where it's a chimpanzee, and this is where it's a mud skipper, and then it's some kind of big regular universe with legs and everything out here somewhere. But they have this idea that, well, it starts off a little tiny line, then it does some super expansion at some millisecond in, and then it starts doing this other expansion-y thing. I mean, they're just making up a story. I mean, there's no real evidence to back up any of this stuff except some photons from the deep universe appear to be longer waves than they should be. That's it. That's all they've got. They've got one stinking little tiny piece of evidence. And as the previous video by this guy just pointed out, he says that happens every time a photon tries to leave a sun, it gets stretched. And he's, saying that space keeps injecting new space in here. That new space keeps popping into all these locations, right? Now, I don't think it's making protons well, protons are supposed to be made of quarks, right? So what's their theory? Do they think protons are getting fatter because the space is getting in between the quarks? Do they think electrons are getting bigger? See, the electrons are supposed to be solid, indivisible. Does the expanding space get inside the electrons and the electrons get bigger? The whole thing is just a silly made-up pile of crap. They just cobbled this together out of crap. They took crap and glued it together and said, look, here's our crap sculpture of reality. And it's a crap sculpture. It doesn't make any sense. It's this, why call it a Big Bang when it's some other kind of thing? Say some sort of expansurant. Expansurant. I don't know. It's not comprehensible. It's not rationally conceivable that this is the right answer, in my opinion. The reasonable person can't see it. And I believe I'm a reasonable person. I can't see it. It doesn't make any frickin' sense. It's a silly frickin' story. Oh, stupid ads. He does have a bunch of ads now. Quite annoying.
Welcome to Electron Line, and now we're going to take a look at the photon in a different way. We're going to look at the cosmic microwave background. You may say, well, what is the cosmic microwave background? Well, we call it CMB for short.
Okay, that worked. Cool.
Is the radiation that's left over in the universe from the very beginning when the Big Bang happened, when the universe was
So that's the part that doesn't make any sense, right? When the Big Bang happened, the stuff was moving the speed of light that way. I mean, away. And it didn't slow down or do something else, so it should be so much further away than we are. I mean, we're some kind of stuff that obviously wasn't light. We weren't cosmic background radiation, right? I mean, I don't think that's their theory that a bunch of photons compiled together and turned into the matter bits, and then those matter bits slowly dragged into each other while the space was expanding, which doesn't make any sense either. How can you even have gravity that works if you keep shoving new space in all the time? I mean, the whole thing is silly.
filled with radiation. That radiation, whatever portion didn't make matter, is still out there floating around in all directions.
Floating around. So he says something like floating around in all directions. How does it go in all directions when it came from one place, the bang place? It came from the bang place, and now he's saying it's just floating around in all directions. How does it do that exactly? I mean, you can understand, okay, there's so much matter, and it's all reflecting off the matter, so it's caught because it keeps hitting little bits of stuff that are coming out of the explosion. But then that you have to have a density of stuff that's insanely thick because it still should be leaking the hell out, at some rate. So it doesn't make any sense. And if it's reflecting off other stuff, well, how would it look different than actually being emitted by the other stuff? Like all the suns and all the stuff burning in the universe, that all that stuff is also creating these microwaves or broken photons that are put back together, or however you want to look at it, but energy, in these other forms, not visible light. How would you tell the difference? You couldn't tell the difference if it was reflecting. So what, there's just no continuity to this story. There's three bears, and then all of a sudden it turns into like Mickey Mouse, and then, it's the Pooh characters, and then, it's just, there's no continuity here.
Space is simply filled with it. We discovered that back in the 1960s when those two Bell Lab engineers went out and they started doing experiments with their first radio telescope. They discovered this radiation, and it turned out that the radiation is uniform throughout the entire universe. Of course, that radiation is made up of, it.
Yeah, so are stars and galaxies and all that stuff. So yes, the fact that the universe is made of the same stuff, the same soup, it looks like it's everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's the same kind of stuff in the soup. There's a pea and carrots and beans and whatever, and it's peas and carrot and beans over there, and it's peas and carrots and beans over there. So nothing surprising about that.
Photons. The photons have a specific wavelength, and that wavelength is correspondent to the temperature of 2.726 degrees Kelvin, which is the current temperature of the universe. So
this is more crap, right? Because they got that number by doing their own microwave math to get that number. The current temperature is based on what they're measuring by measuring the microwaves. So even that doesn't make any sense. I mean, this is just such circular stuff. Like that number is going to give him the number for the frequency when they did exactly the opposite math to get that number in the first place. And then he brings up Wien's law. He doesn't tell us anything about who wrote this law or why this law should mean anything to a rational person.
if we use Wien's law, we can actually figure out the wavelength of that radiation, and it's extremely uniform all throughout the universe. Of course, that radiation has a black body curve, a very peculiar black body curve like this, and of course, the peak.
So it's a big giant lump. And then he decides, well, the average or the peak or whatever number he's using. He's not using the mean or whether he's using the average. But the fact is that the same curve is for most emitters in the universe will have some kind of curve like that, in the sense it's easier to produce one kind of radiation than it is other kinds of radiation. So the curve is usually the other way around. So he doesn't even point out what side is the ultraviolet end and which side, which side's the hot end and which side is the cold end. So the cold end is the sloping line. So there's lots of radio waves and different kinds of radiation at those lower frequencies and less at the very high frequencies, which again, you can just understand that, of course, any kind of explosion creates a lot more low velocity stuff than high velocity stuff. Just the way it ends up working out. And so you'd say that certainly is sensible, that everything's going to produce lots of little pieces and slow pieces and broken pieces than it is the really sharp pointy pieces or something. How to best explain that? And then there's going to be a pretty much a cutoff in the sense that you can't get more out of the explosion than the explosion produced in terms of velocities. So you can only be so close to the bomb, so to speak, and be ejected at this maximum speed, and only a few things get to be at maximum speed. And so there's very little, and so it drops off. It's the same curve for all black body radiation. All radiation, period.
Radiation is the one that corresponds to 2.726 Kelvin, but the band is fairly narrow and everything is very tuned to this particular wavelength on the black body curve.
So says you. Your drawing doesn't indicate anything narrow. So you can say it, but you didn't draw it. So you didn't show us something that looks out of the ordinary. You showed us something that looks incredibly ordinary. Exactly what the sun's doing. The sun's doing exactly the same curve. It's just in a different wavelength, and visible light is the peak. But that's all.
So let's find out what that wavelength is. The wavelength is equal to 0.0029 divided by the temperature is 2.726 Kelvin, and this of course would be meters or Kelvin times meters actually. Let me go ahead and raise that. The units of that constant is Kelvin times meters, and so we end up with wavelength in meters. So with a calculator, 0.0029 divided by 2.726.
Didn't work. I don't know why it does that. Spacebar works and it doesn't work. So the numbers he just put in there, they just did exactly the opposite math to get the first number. So this is just circular math. We used one formula to create a number, and then we're going to pretend we found a new number by doing exactly the opposite math. It just doesn't work. Gotta find the K.
Equals, so the wavelength is equal to 1.064 millimeters. That's the current wavelength of the CMB, the cosmic microwave background radiation that now permeates through the entire universe. But it hasn't always been like that, because what we found was, at that point, the universe...
Okay, so that's a very high microwave, right? The low limit of microwaves is somewhere around 3 centimeters. So 1.0 millimeters is, you're getting very close to ultraviolet light. Infrared. It's more infrared than it is a microwave, but they don't call it the infrared background radiation, right? So that's kind of suspicious right there. In my book, it's kind of suspicious. As far as I understand, microwaves are like 3 centimeters, 2 centimeters. A microwave oven's full of 2 centimeter stuff. 1 millimeter ain't 2 centimeters. Yeah. So it's 20 times less, or whatever the number is.
That cooled down to about 3,000 Kelvin. At that point also, the radiation was able to flow freely and roam freely through the universe, because at a temperature below 3,000 Kelvin, the electrons would then join in with the protons and with the alpha particles to form helium, and all of a sudden radiation was free to roam through the universe. At that point,
So I'd say that's all crap. This is just a story they're making up. I think it's clear that what you have to do to create protons and electrons is to have insanely high pressure to be able to push, smash so much force together, little force bits, to make these things, these boats. They're made out of the bones of the photon, so to speak, in my opinion. That's the more reasonable explanation. And atoms are likewise made in these gravity furnaces, some place that's got insane amounts of gravity to compress the atoms together to force the arrangements to exist. And once they're in that arrangement, then it's a good arrangement. So it's a little tricky getting things into arrangements. Even the solar system, there's rules about how you get caught in an orbit. And the rule is that you can't just fly by a sun or something and get into an orbit. It won't happen. You have to change your speed to get into an orbit. And there's special rules about how you make atoms too. And the same kind of thing. You have to create a special circumstance. I'd say the circumstance is high pressure. And you're not going to have that high pressure, okay, if you just let everything free and loose. That's the opposite of pressure.
radiation wavelength, and we can then, of course, use Wien's law to figure out what it was then. So the wavelength was equal to 0.0029 Kelvin times meters divided by 3000 Kelvin. And so lambda was equal to 0.0029 divided by 3000, and we get a wavelength of 967 nanometers, which is equal to 0.0009.
Right, so they just did 967 is infrared, clearly, radiation. And so he's saying this stuff started off as infrared radiation, and somehow the photons are cooling off as they're floating around, as he put it. They're moving the speed of light, but somehow they're floating around in the universe. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So he's basically saying the infrared turned into infrared, because the spectrum is kind of large, from radio wave to infrared is a whole lot of stuff in that part of the spectrum, and we just haven't given them different labels. But based on their own labeling, there's a huge difference, just as there's a huge difference between when you get into the gamma rays versus X-rays. But whatever.
967 millimeters. Notice the wavelength of the light back then, or I shouldn't say light, it's really, at that point it was infrared radiation, the cosmic microwave background, the wavelength was about a little bit less than 1/1000th that it is today. So this is what it was at the beginning of the universe, after decoupling, 380,000 years after the universe started, and it has grown in size to this value right here.
All right, so this decoupling stuff, all of this jargon, all of this is just a story, okay? There's nothing to base this up except the fact that they can do these equations and pretend they make any sense. But that's it. And then the ground of the theory is that a bunch of space is being created all the time that's causing this cool down. Somehow the the photons are cooling off because there's space being created within them.
Here. How has the radiation, how have those photons stretched from what they were then, just slightly under a micrometer, to just slightly above a millimeter during those last 13.8 billion years, because that's about how old the universe is? Well, it turns out, as those photons were continuously roaming through the universe for that entire duration, 13.8 billion years, the universe has grown.
So he says, as it turns out, as if this is a real story, like this isn't just made up, that the pieces of evidence they have to indicate any of this is true are scant, tiny pieces of evidence for which they have conflicting theories. As he just pointed out, he's saying these photons are getting stretched by gravity. So make up your mind. Which is it? Space being injected or gravity? Which one is stretching the photons?
In size, which means space itself has stretched, space itself has grown, and as photons are roaming through space and space is actually expanding, the photons themselves expanded along with space. So it's like photons going through a spider web, and as you pull the spider web out, the photons get bigger along with the spider web. Space is...
And so what else they're theorizing is that this stretching of the photons is somehow a loss of energy, when obviously I would say it doesn't have anything to do with energy, right? I mean, how fast you're able to pull the gun is not the energy of the bullets. So the trigger speed isn't really an energy equation. It just has to do with the fact that, yes, atoms are resonant dependent. They have frequency. They're frequency dependent in the sense that you can't kick something out of its orbit without hitting it with a quick enough frequency, because it rebounds. So I've been over this argument 1,000 times now, so I don't want to be terribly redundant, but they don't understand that simple concept, that the only part that appears to be energetic about frequency is the fact that frequency makes all the difference if you're trying to tip something over or break something, or then frequency matters. But frequency doesn't matter in terms of, there's no energy equation for the pulling of the gun's trigger. There's no trigger pulling energy required. All the energy is in the bullet. It does the exploding, and the gun trigger thing is so minute amount of energy. The amount of energy you need to disrupt something is tiny compared to the energy you release after you've disrupted it, so to speak. I don't know what good example. I mean, you go back to the nuclear thing, and you could just make the argument the motion of the neutrons is a tiny piece of energy, but it has a huge implication in terms of making a bunch of atoms fall apart and release their extra bits. How else to say it? Well, anyway, so they're not, they don't even understand. So, but what they're arguing is that somehow that energy from the photon getting stretched, that's work. To stretch photons is work. So to make this spider web stretch takes work. That is to make this extra space. And they're saying that the work is being accomplished by the photons themselves stretching. So again, another completely circular argument. It just doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, I don't think it makes any sense. I can't
spider
make
web.
it make
Well,
any
not
sense.
exactly, of course, but space is also not nothing. It is something. It's like the fabric of space.
you.
And as photons travel through space, as space changes size, in this case stretched and grown in size over the billions and billions of years, the photons grew with it. So photons actually change shape as space itself changes. Just an amazing thing. And so what we can say...
And the amazing part is that they have, like I said, the real factual evidence, the facts. They have to base this whole theory they've made up. If you saw the actual facts, you'd be amazed. I mean, they have some hair stuck to a piece of tree bark. They didn't analyze the hair to figure out who it belongs to, and they've come up with a whole Sasquatch story. I mean, they've made a whole Sasquatch out of this tiny little hair stuck on a piece of bark. In a world where we know bears exist, it's that bad. And I'm the bad guy, because I don't just say, yeah, I get it. Jesus walked on water. Jesus raised the dead. Jesus gave healing powers to his disciples, yet they turned on him. Moses parted the seas. All these miracles. And I'm supposed to just believe it. And I'm a bad guy. If I don't fall for that crap, I'm some sort of bad person. Fuck this. That's why this planet sucks. Is that if you're not a fairy tale teller, you're some kind of evil motherfucker.
Then is how much bigger is the universe today compared to what it was back 380,000 years after the universe had started? Well, since the wavelengths have grown a little over 1,000 times in size, the universe has grown 1,000 times in size in all directions. 1,000 times in this direction, 1,000 times in this direction, 1,000 times in this direction.
What a surprise! A big bang causes things to expand. Wow! Who would have figured that out on their own? But only 1,000 times. 1,000 times what? So this is all supposed to happen from some singularity that was, infinitely small. You're right? And yet they say, it's only 1,000 times bigger than infinitely small. This is just baby talk if it's so bad.
The volume has grown more than 1 billion times what it was when the universe was only 380,000 years old. Imagine, the universe has grown from what it was then to what it is today, and today it is more than 1 billion times the volume that it was back then. And the result of that is as the radiation, called cosmic background.
So, just a story. As I've indicated, the counter argument would be is they have no clue how it really works, but I would say it's an oscillating universe, and that when we look back into the past, what we see is matter more consolidated. The galaxies, they're called quasars when they're old, are smaller and brighter, indicating they're more massive and they take up less space. Indicating that maybe it was more gravity then, because they were condensed. And so there was less energy, less cosmic background radiation, less energy in the universe to push them into each other, to compress them. There was more compression back then because there was less radiation. And over time, things have expanded, and the galaxies are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but weaker and weaker and weaker. And as they're doing that, they're losing all this cosmic background radiation. They're leaking a lot of radiation. But the point is they're leaking it to a space that is a closed universe. So it's going to come back again as gravity. And it's going to compress everything back again. Because when you free the force, then the force puts more pressure on you and it compresses you. And the force goes inside you as you compress. It gets locked. Bound. So anyway, just horrible nonsense.
Or the cosmic microwave background, as it's been as the universe has been stretching, the waves have been stretching, 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 where today the wavelength is about 1 millimeter, where back then it was about 1 micrometer. And so you see that not only is our photons subjected to gravity, photons are subjected to space itself. And as space stretches, photons stretch with them. And there's another look at what photons are.
Right. Well, I'd say there's just no evidence for any of that stretching of photons. It's just nonsense. Photons have to interact with matter to have their frequency changed. Certainly that can be happening in space as photons travel through space. But it's not happening that way. It's not some magic thing that happens. Space grows. That's not the explanation. All right. So I'll pause here and decide if there's anything more to say. Yeah. And just maybe give up for today. Yeah. Yeah, back. Yes, I think it's all. Yeah, it's enough. Yeah, there's no point in starting some other subject. So, till the next time and such, and so forth and whatnot. Yes. Just do the same speech. I mean, all I can do is attempt to reason with you and point out the reason why he provided no evidence of anything is because they don't have any evidence for these stories and such.